Okay, so question was already asked. We talked about some of the economic changes during the Gilded Age. So this is looking at chapter 16 information. So the largest economic changes of this time, right, is industrialization. Where we have more factories being built, they're getting bigger, and they're innovating. We have lots of new ways to create the product for a higher profit, whether it's through things like mass production techniques, the assembly line, we have Taylorism. Frederick Taylor, remember that's where they like time different jobs that you do as a worker, and they're looking for the most efficient way as possible. It's also sometimes called scientific management. So basically, you're treating the factory as like a science experiment, trying to find the fastest, most efficient way to make your product. And so then our owners of these businesses, sometimes we call them industrialists. Other times, people will call them captains of industry. That's kind of a positive spin on the leaders of the businesses. It focuses on all the good things that's coming out of these, the growth of business, whether it's the gospel of wealth. So that is where the idea basically that rich people should give their money out to the community. We saw Carnegie do that with libraries. Rockefeller did that with the University of Chicago. Basically, it's giving a bunch of money away. Some people will attribute in the growth of industrialists to a standard of living increase. And what that just means is like what people are used to in their everyday life. They expect more as time goes on. So like in the early 1800s, no one expected running water in their home. But by the end of the 1800s, kind of people expected that to be part of their home, or electrification, right? So the idea is that through these factories' growth, their innovation, people get more amenities for their daily life. And that comes from these business owners. The negative aspect, historians call them robber barons. It's a negative perspective on them. And this focuses on things that they do that's maybe bad for its workers, bad for the people, including low pay, bad working conditions. You might also focus on like how they became a trust or a monopoly. Remember, when you became a trust or monopoly, that means you have total control over a whole business. So like if you're in the oil business, you control 90% of all oil. And when you control that much, then you can control the price. You can control how much is supplied out to the people. And sometimes that can be used to drive profits instead of what's best for the people. Ways to become a trust or monopoly. We have vertical integration. Remember, that's taking out your suppliers, taking out what's the transportation of moving products from one place to another. There's also horizontal integration. So that is taking out your competitors, getting rid of them. People like Carnegie and Rockefeller were really good at all of these things. Questions so far? So with the growing list of negatives that's coming out of these factories, workers are going to seek out ways to improve their situation. So one of the ways that they're going to do that in the 1800s is to create labor unions. Remember, the idea of a labor union is that instead of negotiating one-on-one with one worker and one boss, you collectivize, you get all the workers together and negotiate together with the boss. And so you have things like collective bargaining, and that's just where the people are bargaining with the boss. At times, though, the boss would not even negotiate with the workers. Sometimes they wouldn't even acknowledge that the labor union is legitimate and would refuse to negotiate. They might do this because they'll say, well, if we make all these concessions, if we do the changes that you want, it's just going to make the product more expensive, and that get passed on to the into the consumer, and that could happen. Especially if the boss is trying to insulate their profits, right? They want to keep their profits up. And if they have to pay their workers more, they're probably more willing to raise the prices. So people buying the stuff will basically pay for the wages, the wage increases, instead of that coming out of the profits of the company. So if they don't want to negotiate, workers might go on strike, where they refuse to work. And basically, this is a waiting game. It's to see who's going to blink first. Are the workers who are not now getting paid, are they going to, give in and go back to work? Or is the boss going to give in and say, okay, we need to produce something. We need you back to work, so let's make the changes. Typically, the government would side with the business. We see this continually happen throughout. Oftentimes, when there's strikes, government would call police to put down strikes, and sometimes do it violently. One example of this is the Haymarket Square incident. So that is where there was a bunch of protests in the streets. Had to increase police presence. There were some people who were in the labor union who were anarchists. Do you remember what the anarchists did? They threw bombs at police. Okay, I think it was like 7 and 5 police officers were killed in this. The number doesn't matter to us right now. But police died. Anarchists were rounded up, put on trial, executed. What's important for us is that this is going to lead to a decrease in union membership. Because now businesses are taking this incident and kind of lumping in like, okay, if you're in a labor union, you must be an extremist like those anarchists. And people didn't want to be associated with that. A famous, we talked about 2 famous groups, the American Federation of Labor And just to make sure I got it right today, they focused on skilled workers. So in order to join that union, you had to be a skilled worker. Other groups, like the Knights of Labor, was open to all, almost all. Women could join the labor union. African American workers could join the labor union, which was pretty unique in that time period. Really, the only group that were disallowed were who? Chinese immigrants, and that's because of a larger anti-Chinese effort in the late 1800s. Let's see. So if you're working in these factories, you know, there are situations where low pay, bad working conditions. I'm gonna say something like changes in office or changes in workplace. There's more what are called white collar jobs or office jobs. So we start to have a distinction between those people working on like the factory floor. We're getting paid the lowest, worst working conditions, and those who are moving into the office positions were a little bit better paid. This eventually leads to like a middle class. And the two biggest factors into like your success in a position or like how much you're going to get paid or your likelihood of getting advancement is your gender and your race. Unfortunately, promotions, more skilled jobs would be pretty much exclusive to white male workers. For women, they were mostly working in, for women and African American workers, mostly they'd be confined to lower paid, lower skilled jobs, and would not be given the same opportunities in higher paid, higher skilled jobs. Okay. Questions about anything of this? I'll give them to you.
What is?
Taylorism was where like it's called scientific management, where you're basically looking to look for the most like efficient ways to have your workers work, time them and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of the economic changes. Are there any other chapters you want to talk about or big topics you want to talk about? Yeah. We like this like chapter 17. Okay. So we kind of talked about a lot of the changes happening right in city life. And when we talked about this, we kind of talked about like early in this time period, so like mid 1800s. Early, later. Okay. So first, let's talk about like where people lived. Early on, like in these big cities, we would have like single family homes. But later on, that turned into tenement apartments. These are usually like rundown apartments, usually close to the factory. No running water, no air shaft, no ventilation into your homes. Lots of people crammed into one apartment room or something like that. Eventually, by later, they made changes to like better apartments. I don't have a name for it. They just led to like more standards, new rules saying like, oh, you have to have running water in new apartment buildings, new electrification. So we're gonna put a time period, like 1850s, like 1880s, like 1900 or later. So no public transportation. Eventually you do get stuff like electrified trolleys. And then eventually you get something like modern subway system. Subway. Early 1850s, you get wood framed buildings, steel framed buildings, and eventually skyscrapers. Kerosene lanterns. Bad sanitation, no running water. Unsafe factories. Remember 1850s, there's like no rules against there's no rules to like make your factories safe for your workers for a while, until you start to see progressives wanting to change that. There was a big incident that happened in New York City that led to some changes in workplace. What was that incident? The Triangle Shirtwaist fires. A lot of like workplace safety things, saying like, oh, you have to have like a sprinkler system. You have to have ways that people can exit out of the building in case there's a fire. Um, in the early time period, there's not much help for the poor. But starting in the later time period or later time of this, progressives do look for ways that they can help. So we have things like um, social gospel. Remember, that's things like that to be a good Christian, you have to go and help others. And so that starts groups like the Salvation Army, that collects money and then goes and helps the poor. This is the settlement homes. Some are like basically community centers, to help the people, help the working class in big cities. Who's the most famous example of this, or what is? The Hull House by Jane Addams. I can't remember. She might be in past 1900. I can't remember. Some doesn't matter. All this stuff is happening during this time. Okay. Any questions on those changes? It's helpful to visualize it like this. Yes. And then which. Okay. One other city life change I want to mention is what's going to happen to immigrants. First of all, this one is reviewed because we talked about it in the previous unit. What are push factors? Reasons why you leave a country. So it could be like famine, a dictator, political unrest, whatever it is. Reasons why you leave your old country, which would mean a pull factor, are reasons why you come to the United States. Maybe it's because you hear it's a land of opportunity, lots of land available, jobs. Yep, this is immigration. Remember in the 1850s, so this is last unit, where did most immigrants come from? Ireland and Germany. If you ever forget, remember that cartoon that we saw with the two guys dressed up as like a beer barrel and a whiskey barrel? Remember that? That's older. So now when we get to like 1870s to 1920, where are most immigrants coming from? Not China. Southern and Eastern Europe. So that's Southern and Eastern Europe. So, I mean, compared to Ireland, almost none of these speak English. None of these countries speak English. There's a much higher Jewish population coming over. So we have people coming over. When they come from Southern and Eastern Europe, they come into America, to New York through where? What's the place where they? Ellis Island. That's where they do the processing. Make sure you're not like running away from the police or something, that murdering someone and running away. Making sure you're a worker, making sure you're not bringing any communicable diseases. Once they get to New York City, most Southern and Eastern Europeans would stay in the big cities on the East Coast. Many would live in ethnic communities or ethnic neighborhoods where a lot of Polish immigrants would live in a Polish neighborhood, or a lot of Italian immigrants would live in an Italian neighborhood, and that was to assist each other, find a place to live, find a place to work. It was, hey, we have restaurants from our native country, and they make the food that we're used to, or we celebrate the holidays that we're used to, right? It was a way to like get used to these, to coming into the United States, to help each other out. They also created mutual aid societies, which were basically like the precursor to settlement homes. There were settlement homes specifically targeting immigrants from those countries. So Italians, would create mutual aid societies specifically for Italian immigrants. Many immigrants would begin working in these factories in the East Coast. One group that will be eventually first brought into the United States to work, but then eventually shut out were Chinese immigrants, and that was through the Chinese Exclusion Act, which made it almost impossible for Chinese laborers, working class, to come to the United States. And it's just China that they're focused on, this very targeted law excluding Chinese immigrants from the United States. Now, one group that was focused on helping immigrants were political machines. Why would political machines help immigrants? To get their vote, right? Sure. Political machines are basically political parties who have organized together to keep and maintain power by any means necessary, even if it's illegal or unethical. And so political machines are all about trying to take power away from the people and keep it for themselves so they can keep power. The most famous example of this is Boss Tweed. And he controlled the Democratic Tammany Hall in New York City. And they would do things like election fraud, bribery, and kickbacks. Now, kickbacks are where they're stealing money from the public's taxes. Who took down Boss Tweed? Thomas Nast. What did he do, or how did he do it? Through political cartoons. We have a lot of corruption in these political machines. And so this is going to lead to people calling for reforms in politics. What does reform mean? A reform is a change. Let's fix something so it's better in the future. So specifically for political machines, people wanted to give power back to the people. So what are some examples of reforms that they did? Referendum, right? Where the people vote on an issue. Okay? And then if they vote for something, it could become a law. What else? Recall, where you can vote out a state or local politician. What else? Secret ballot, yes. I just heard wrong. Yeah, secret ballot where no one knows who you voted for unless you tell them who you voted for. What else? Think of one more thing. Yeah, direct primary. So instead of politicians choosing the nominee, the people vote for the nominee. These are the political changes happening to give people more power. Okay. We have 2 minutes before we're going to be done. Any questions? Anything else you want me to go over?
Couple examples of how progressive and actually help change
Change like anything or?
industrial, like the problems with the building.
Yeah, so, one way they're gonna do that is through like muckrakers. Remember, muckrakers are people who are trying to expose the corruption or illegal things that the government is trying to do. And so we have people like Ida Tarbell, who would expose Rockefeller's policies, his horizontal integration that he did and the sketchy things he would do. You could talk about any of the, if you're looking for like, how did progressives try to fix work in place, any of the labor unions, right? Any labor union and anything that they're doing is trying to fix the factory systems. You could talk about what happened after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. I'm gonna say changes. So after the fire, the changes that were made, so like making rules saying you have to have safety equipment inside a factory, something like that. You have progressives fighting against child labor. That one is not going to be very successful, though, at least not yet. Certain states will be able to pass child labor laws, but nationally, they do pass a law, but it gets struck down. That's not going to be put into like a national law until like the 1930s, I think. Yeah, those are some. Does that help? Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. We have another review session tomorrow morning.